we see speciation. We see speciation in real time with algae, and we see them go from single cellular to colonial or to multicellular with different tissues and different cell functions. So why would God make each of these species individually and specially, a special creation for each single one of these steps? Even though they have each been able to be proven to evolve into each other, why would God make organisms that fill every step of what evolution would predict and then expect us to reject evolution? If life was created 6,000 years ago, the creator certainly wanted us to think life was evolved. We observe this happening in real time, both in the wild and the laboratory. We've seen single cells go to multicellular organisms, and not just colonies, but colonies that have evolved the exact same cell number, and they retain that cell number. And then from there, we've seen them actually differentiate into sexual cells versus somatic cells in the laboratory. And we proved that the gene that is doing this was present in the unicellular starting organisms. And we observed them evolve in the lab multiple times with multiple different selection pressures. And we saw this happen.
Well, you're calling it multicellular. Is it actually a colony, or is it actually something that has maybe a group of people can get together and one decides they're going to raise the food, another one's going to be the policeman, somebody else is going to mow the grass? You can have a community of people cooperating together, but they're still each individual people. They may have the ability to do all the different jobs of the community because they've specialized in one. Like the plumber doesn't know how to do electric, he can do plumbing, but he's still a human being. Are these algae ever becoming what anybody would consider a single organism, or is it just a colony that is species diversification where some specialize in one feature or another? Years. Why don't we see it happen in the laboratory? Amoeba produce amoeba. No exceptions.
Yeah, I mean, we've observed both. So we observed going from unicellular to colonial, and then from colonial to colonial with the exact same cell number and type, to colonial with differentiated cell types, and to colonial with fully different cell types inside the organism in a different location than all the rest of the somatic cells. So we have 6 different steps. So your God wants us to think that things evolved.
No, you've proven my point. You've said a colony every time. All you have is a colony of cells. Sometimes they specialize. One becomes the plumber, one becomes the electrician, but they're still individuals. So it's a colony, not an organism.
Scientists have witnessed, and this happened February 20th, 2019. This is brand new. This is probably the single, this is utterly staggering. Scientists have witnessed a single-celled algae evolve into a multicellular organism. The evolution took just 50 weeks. It was triggered by the introduction of a single predator. The way they knew to introduce that predator and that would be effective in this was because they understood evolution, and it did exactly what it was predicted to do. The team captured 9 14-second time-lapse videos of the transition where a single-cell organism did the single most incredible evolutionary thing it can. It became a multi-celled organism. That's the ball game. That's evolution.
Okay, well, a couple of obvious questions. If now for the first time they've seen this in 2019, why have we been teaching this for 150 years with no evidence? If there was no evidence until February 20th of 2019, why were we teaching it for the last 150 years? Because it wasn't science. I don't think it's science now. I think what they've actually observed is colonization. A group of them decided to work together. If a group of people decide to work together to repel a common enemy, they build a fort and everybody get in the fort, and one guy says, I'll take care of the cannon. Somebody else says, I'll take care of the sniper rifle or whatever. That's colonization for predation, which is what you talk about. I will read the report and I'll do a critique on it if you'd like.
Well, what comes first? Then do you become a 2-celled animal, and then a 3-celled animal, and then a 4-celled animal? Well, there was this excellent paper that came out this year in 2019 on the de novo origins of multicellularity in response to predation. There's some awesome videos showing this happen in real time. And essentially, these organisms, it's a species of algae, are exposed to a filter-feeding protist, and these guys live single-cellularly normally. But in response to the pressure of predation, they begin to clump. And as they clump, they start to reproduce. And those reproduced organisms become a part of the clump. You see what I'm saying? So basically, we're seeing this very proto multicellularity.
Hold on. Hang on,
ahead.
this is a discussion here. Let me ask you. You say they became multicellular. Actually, they became a clump, a colony that worked together. And then you said they began to reproduce. Did the clump produce another clump, or did the cells in the clump produce another cell?
Well,
Read that article.
very similarly to how humans do it, right? When a human produces another human, first they produce a single-celled organism. Then that organism proceeds to divide upon itself and produce a clump, or in a human case, a fetus. So blastocysts, things like this, these periods of human embryologic development where you start off as a single cellular organism. So yes, they do produce another single cell, but that single cell builds upon itself as it reproduces. I can link you this paper if you'd like. I think I just have the abstract here. If you like, I'll read it.
See, it is this one. Here you go. If we could put that up on screen. De novo origins of multicellularity in response to predation. This is the figure where I got that figure right here. I mean, this is a laboratory experiment where we directly observed a unicellular organism becoming an obligate multicellular organism. And this involved a number of unique new traits. This group of organisms, it's a type of green algae called Chlamydomonas, never had this thing called an extracellular matrix. An extracellular matrix isn't even something that all multicellularity things have. Animals have it, but other multicellular cellular things don't. This is a completely new example of an extracellular matrix. Reproduction via multicellular structures called propagules. That evolved completely new in this species. These new traits involve new genes. You have to have novel genetic information in order to get this new stuff. And we could go top to bottom looking at things like that. Let me end this screen share here. I have another example here of a plasmid. Kent, do you know what a plasmid is? Everyone in the audience know what a plasmid is? Are you familiar with that term?
It's been years ago that I studied that. I don't remember the details now, but anyway.
I think it's this one right here.
One topic at a time, though, Dan. Could you go back to your slide of your algae and tell me, is this a colony of algae working together, or is this actually one single organism?
It is one single organism, and we know that that's the case because not every individual in the group evolves. This is the plasmid one. This is the next one I want to talk about. We know that it's a true organism because in a colony, what you need to have is basically there's kind of competition within the colony because each thing could live on its own. And if you don't reproduce, you kind of lose out. But in multicellular, you have an agreement between all the cells in the organism that, like, look, we're all genetically identical. So you over there, the germline, you're going to reproduce. And that's okay with me, the skin cells, because you have all the same genes anyway. And in this example with Chlamydomonas, they reproduce as multicellular units, but not every cell in that group reproduces. So they have specific cells that are responsible for reproduction. It's not just a colony. It is true multicellularity.
Okay, now, Dan, is this happening? Is somebody causing this to happen in a laboratory, getting them to get together, or is this they're discovering it in nature? How do they know it wasn't always this way?
We know it wasn't always this way because we found, I want to say dozens, but don't quote me on the number. I'm not an algae person, but I want to say we have dozens of species of like Chlamydomonas and the related algae, and none of them have these traits. And you can look in their genomes and see, like, compare their genomes to the things like the colonial green algae or the true multicellular green algae and the land plants. And there's a bunch of genes that they're missing that are involved in multicellularity. But here we have the de novo evolution of true multicellularity from members of that lineage that have never experienced it before. So we could be very certain that this is not just recovering an ancestral trait. That's definitely not the case. They're evolving new information that's leading to a new phenotype, multicellularity, and the associated biochemical changes that are required for that to happen.
Somehow you need to get your lizard to come from a rock over billions of years, or come from an amoeba. I'll let you start off with a living form like an amoeba, to go from single cell to multi-cell. You don't have any examples of that. It doesn't happen. We don't see it happening today. No single-celled animal is producing anything other than single-celled offspring. That's all that happens. God said they bring forth after their kind.
Creationists say that evolution can't be true because we weren't there in the distant past to observe it. but we do see evolution happening today. In the lab, scientists studied a form of unicellular algae called Chlamydomonas. They exposed the algae to a filter-feeding predator, and in response to predation, several specimens evolved multicellularity as a defense mechanism. So this is a true multicellular organism that used to be single-celled, and the experiment happened over 50 weeks. Now, Kent might say that it's still an algae, but normally this algae is single-celled and only brings forth more single-celled algae. But this is a new kind of algae, a multicellular one with new genetic information. It got new traits like an extracellular matrix. This is not just a colony because each cell cannot live on its own. And this is beneficial to the survival of the organism because it is now too big for the predator to eat.
The textbooks do teach charts like I have up here, showing humans and pine trees and whales and fish having a common ancestor from an amoeba. Your example of an amoeba becoming a colony or a multicellular organism, even if it did, okay? Can it survive? Can it reproduce? Can that cluster of amoebas that coalesce to over 50 weeks to make this multicellular amoeba, is there another one someplace it can mate with? And now can it produce a multicellular colony instantly? How do they make babies? I'd like to hear more about this research, because even if you get this one example where an amoeba can colonize and turn into the equivalent of a unit that works together, a cohesive unit like the military does with their squads and armies, so what? Is that therefore science, that an amoeba turned to a human? What you've observed is an amoeba may, over 50 weeks, I'll do some research on that, has been able to colonize to protect itself from some threat out there. Who did it mate with, and did it produce another colony? Your algae that developed the ability to live and work together in what you called a multicellular organism. How do you get another one of those? Do you have to start from scratch every time with individual algae? Or can they somehow make a colony into not a colony? Can this new organism produce another organism?
So is a single-celled organism the same kind as a multi-celled organism?
I don't know. Is it actually a colony? Is it a cluster of cells working together?
It's not a colony because in a colony, each cell can break off and live on its own. But in the example I gave, the cells can't live on their own. And it got new traits like the extracellular matrix that binds the new cells together. And it was also a beneficial mutation, or it was beneficial. Well,
answer my question then, AJ. Can this new, you don't want to call it a colony, can this new multicellular
organism? Yeah.
Can this new multicellular organism produce with another multicellular organism just like it and make multicellular organisms? Or do they have to start with individual cells every time?
Well, that sounds like sexual reproduction, which is not something that algae does. But the example I gave in the lab, it was a single-celled going to a multicellular one. So yeah, it started with a single cell, just like you did in your mother's womb. You started off as a single cell, and you divided and added new cells until you became, all the cells you have today. And it's the same thing with evolution. That's like evo-devo.
Well, if it's only done in the lab, don't you see a problem here? Because this is not natural selection. This is artificial selection. There's nothing natural about it. And that you rely on that one example to say we should all teach that the amoebas turn to humans and whales over billions of years. I'll give you quadrillions of years if you want. We don't observe it. It's a religious belief. It's something you believe in, which is fine. Keep your religion at home. I don't want to pay for it to be taught. That's all.
Well, you don't.
Yeah. There's all kinds of things that goes into the public schools besides property tax. And I've paid plenty of property tax over the years. So you're missing the point completely.